of longtime friends and all of you in the chat and joining us today for this conversation. The program today is To AI or Not to AI: Legal Practicalities and Ethical Conundrums of Using AI. And so we're going to explore today the balance between leveraging AI for efficiency and innovation in the legal practice, while also looking at some of the ethical and legal challenges that come with it, touching as well as on some of the technological issues and concerns. And the goal, of course, for having this conversation today is for us to come together as a community and really think about the way that AI could help to enhance rather than compromise access to justice. I will start by just making some quick introductions. My name is Laura Possessky. I am a member of the board of DC Refers, which is collaborating today on today's program. I'm also the immediate past chair of the Science and Technology Law section of the American Bar Association and the vice chair of the American Bar Association's Task Force on Law and Artificial Intelligence. And so I've been really looking in depth at a lot of the ways that AI is going to impact the legal profession over the course of the past few years and moving forward. In addition, by day, I'm a vice president of business affairs at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so I'm going to go through and introduce each of our speakers. I'll invite you to each just give a few words about yourself, and then we'll get started with our discussion. David, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm David Greisen. I'm the chair of the technology committee at DC Refers. DC Refers is a nonprofit in DC that helps connect moderate means individuals at between 200% and 400% of the poverty line with attorneys who are willing to represent them at significantly below market rate. We're currently implementing AI into our services. In my day job, I am CEO and co-founder of Open Law Library, which is an organization that helps governments publish their laws directly to their public in both computer and human readable formats. And so we're actually starting to see a lot of people really using the computer readable formats of the laws that we are helping our government partners publish.
Great, thanks, David. Ray?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ray List, Director of Strategy and Risk Management at the DC Bar. And part of my role at the bar is helping with some of the larger projects that involve different departments and that are often public facing. And one of our biggest projects going on right now is the implementation of a lawyer referral service. And David over at DC Refers has been very helpful for us as we begin to stand this up. We look at going live here in about 3 weeks, and our lawyer referral service relies heavily on AI, on NLP, which is natural language processing. So I'll be talking a bit about that as a case study today, and a bit about how we went to the market and we looked at a couple different vendors and then eventually ended up where we are today. And we're pretty happy where we are, and look forward to the panel today. Thanks.
Thanks, Ray. Joseph?
Yes, my name is Joseph Schieffer. I'm the CEO at A2J Tech. Great to be with you today. Our company works on access to justice technology projects, as you can see in our name. One of those is the DC Coordinated Intake and Referral System that you may have heard about among the legal services organizations in DC. And I'm excited to talk to you about how legal aid organizations can be thinking about and utilizing artificial intelligence. Back to you, Laura.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Before we get started as well, I'd also like to just do a quick poll. We're very interested in knowing the extent to which anyone on this call is using AI. So if you wouldn't mind participating in that, that'll give us a sense of the range of experience that we have on the call today, but also, what your thoughts and concerns are from a very top level way. While that poll is open, I will also just give a quick reminder that the views and positions that are expressed by any of us on the call today, of course, are being expressed in our capacity individually and is not necessarily a reflection of the positions of any of our specific organizations or entities. And of course, none of us are offering up legal advice on this call today. So just to put those out of the way while you're taking the poll. Great. And so why don't we just give it a few more seconds, and if you haven't already participated in the poll and would like to, please get your vote in now while it counts. Okay, terrific. I've ended the poll, and hopefully you can see. Can you see the results? Are they posted?
It looks like no one is 100% confident in their AI experience.
Well, if anyone was 100% confident, I would be very worried. So, all right. Uh, all right, so there we go. All right, well, let's kick things off. I just wanted to start off as I can see many of you that are here today are working in the legal services community or are involved in addressing access to justice issues. I do know that one of the challenges that we all share is looking at the challenge of ensuring access to justice for all. One of the things that I wanted to just do as a start off is kind of just look at what is access to justice and what is the access to justice gap. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my Google search. And when I do that, you will see that it provides a nice overview that the access to justice gap is the difference between the need for civil legal assistance and the resources available to meet that need. And as many of you know, these are some of the challenges and areas where all of us are focusing on the concerns. And so, there are some pretty stark realities on a lot of this, and some of the things that have been put out there. For example, the Legal Services Corporation has its Access to Justice Gap report. A link to that report is in the chat for you if you'd like to take a look if you have not seen it already. But it provides some pretty chilling statistics that roughly 92% of people who qualify for pro bono work do not get adequate legal representation in this country. The Stanford Center on Professional Responsibility and the Profession also had a conference this past spring and talked about some of the access to justice gap issues. And some of the studies that they've done have also highlighted that roughly 75% of the 20 million cases that are filed each year in our country have at least one party that is not represented by counsel. So these are pretty bone-chilling statistics, and it really paints what I think the Stanford Access to Justice research certainly highlights is a real clarion call for solving a crisis in our country, as it calls about legal representation and having access to our court system and getting resolution on legal problems that Americans have. So, of course, one of the big opportunities we have with AI technology is the opportunity to solve some of the challenges that we're confronting in access to justice. And so just generally with the legal profession and law practice in general, I mean, Ray, I kick it off to you to start this conversation. What do you see are the real benefits to the AI technology? Like how should we be thinking about using AI in the profession?
Sure. So I think there are a lot of applications, research, due diligence for LSPs. There's a ton of ways to save time. maybe just to talk about what we've learned through implementing our lawyer referral service, that may help. So the problem that we were trying to solve is, how do we link the public with our DC bar members, and how do we do that better, right? So a lot of bars already had lawyer referral services, but to our knowledge, they didn't have an AI component. And one of the things that we found as we went through a bit of a discovery process is that clients often have a tough time identifying the type of attorney that they need. So instead of, for instance, listing a number of practice areas and asking a layperson to check a practice area for which they may not have much familiarity, we decided to try AI. So what we did, largely being lay people ourselves, is we went to the market and, a lot like any software procurement, we described our requirements and we evaluated some different models, and we ended up partnering with a vendor. And essentially the way that our system works, it's almost like a dating matching service, right? So an attorney would upload their description of services, and we've been reminding our members that this is not a resume, right? If you're valedictorian of your school, that doesn't necessarily help AI match you with a client. So we ask for their description of services, and then what happens is the NLP model, it calculates what's called a vector, which is a mathematical object. It compares the story that the client enters in to the description of services that the attorney has entered into the system, into their profile. And then it basically gives a score as to the similarity between those two things. And then what you can do is you can establish a threshold, and then say, okay, for instance, anyone with a threshold of similarity of 70% or greater match these folks. So particularly in as it pertains to access to justice, and we had talked about this a bit previously, we're using AI as a tool, not as the decision maker, right? So what our system will do is it'll yield several results. I believe right now we're at five. So five of the top matching attorneys will show up for the client, and then the client can take a look at those matches and say, okay, well, do I have anything in common with this person? They can sanity check what it is the person's description of services said. And then they themselves, the clients, can decide to contact all of those attorneys or none of those attorneys, right? So at no point are we relying on AI completely to make that determination. And I think that is, as we've gone through this process, something that has really solidified itself, is use it as a tool, not as sort of, a deciding factor.
Ray,
Um,
I was just gonna chime in there. I mean, what I'm hearing you describe is that what effectively the AI tool is able to do is to really streamline the client intake process, right? It creates a framework where you can, with collection of some basic core facts and getting some information, be able to distill that down and kind of accelerate that matching function where you're trying to get a person who has a legal problem to a lawyer that can help them solve it.
yeah, no, that's very well said, Laura. And when we were evaluating some of these models, and when you're talking to some of these firms that are developers, sometimes it's difficult to sort of speak the same language. So as we were evaluating the models, we had a number of our staff, a number of our executive team going through and checking the matches. And so there still was that human element, even in selecting a model and a vendor partner. We looked through hundreds of matches to see what made sense, and then we were making these big spreadsheets to sort of score the models against themselves. But yeah, that's That is accurate. Yes, and there are, I'm sure, a ton of applications for that type of logic, that type of AI. This is just how it's been working well in our experience. And I will say too that thus far, we've been pretty pleased with the process, and we haven't hit too many roadblocks at all. But I would recommend to anyone that's looking at maybe going to the market and partnering with a vendor, the ability to sort of adjust as you go on, I would say is a big thing, right? So when entering into any, software procurement contract, thinking about like, okay, well, what would the cost be if we had to change something after the fact? What do change orders look like? Is the team, are they onshore? Is it someone that speaks our language? Can we access them quickly if something goes wrong? I think all that, especially with a relatively new technology that folks don't really understand, I would place a premium on things like that.
Yeah, those are great points, and I'll just say, just definitely getting into a process what a lot of folks in the tech industry could consider a reiterative process that you're constantly checking and rechecking to make sure that the the goals of the technology, the goals that you're intending to produce with the technology are actually met. Really important. I would also add, and Joseph and David, welcome your coming in on this if you have thoughts on this as well. I mean, in addition to kind of helping to streamline that client intake process, AI can also potentially be used to handle larger caseloads because, particularly in frameworks where you have cases where there are a lot of similar kinds of facts or fact patterns, perhaps, for example, like in a landlord-tenant kind of framework, where you're going to see a lot of kind of basic similarities in the nature of the issues that are coming up. That might be in the form of helping to kind of jumpstart legal research or legal brief writing, and as well as also providing a tool for potentially handling administrative tasks that AI could come in and provide more of a function if it's a process of trying to get a handle on, case stats or other administrative core functions that are important for the organization, but take away from attorneys' time on working on individual client matters. AI has the capacity to provide that kind of service as well. I mean, Joseph or David, did either of you have any additional thoughts on the AI role
I'll
in
just
legal services?
one example that we've been working on recently is with net documents.
Mm.
Now with their Pattern Builder Max technology, you can get an intake in, and then based on the rules you've set up, you can have it automatically draft a letter, for example. So we are seeing where some of those follow-on tasks after intake can be performed very quickly with the use of AI.
So even things like engagement letters or end of representation letters, anything that's documenting kind of pro forma templatized work that is part of the core work of ensuring that we're all doing our work properly and following our ethical requirements. These help move that along. Yeah. All right. That's fantastic. Um, so I would also just like to segue this for a bit and then move us to the conversation about how we can best leverage these tools. And so, Joseph, I guess it would just come to you and ask, what
Sure.
do we need to be thinking about, to best leverage AI to address access to justice?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I'll go through a few different sections I've prepared. I think the first one that comes to mind is your mindset
Mhm.
and kind of where we are in the advancements in AI. And I think one of the things that comes to mind immediately is that the opposing parties that you face may likely be using AI. So I think someone that's using AI versus someone that's not, someone that is using it has a little bit of an upper hand. So you'll want to, uh, regardless of other factors, you just want to be in the game because your adversary or your client's adversary very likely may be using this. And then also your clients could be using AI. So they may go in use like a chat GPT, something like that, and be doing things. So I recommend everyone to be aware of these tools and what they do, because the people that you're working for or against, they very well may be using them. The third thing I had here is that very soon, if you haven't already, you're going to be given the option to use AI with the tools you already have. So I was at a conference last week in Austin it was the Clio conference, and they announced now what's called Clio Duo, which is AI within the Clio case management system. And they displayed how you can use the information within Clio to do a lot of AI functions. So it was a really interesting point for a number of reasons, but a few that I'll just capture here. First is that the Clio Duo AI, it costs, depending on the tier you're on, $29 to $39 per month per user. All right. So all of a sudden, let's say if you're a Clio user, you now have a decision to make, not only for yourself, but your whole staff. It's like, okay, do I want to pay the $30 to $40 a month for each user for AI? And so now you and your staff may or may not want to use it. So in a sense, I'm encouraging you to prepare for that moment in which you have to make a decision, a financial one, in which, all right, am I going to use this tool or not? Because now it's included with software that I'm already using. Also, the other thing I had on that was the data foundations. So it was a light bulb moment for people who maybe aren't using their case management system as much as they should, in that if they don't keep it up to date, that AI won't be as effective. So if you're not, for example, keeping your files in your case management system or notes, etc., well, that AI is not going to be as powerful as it could be, because maybe you're keeping information somewhere else and you're not updating the case in the case management system. Whereas now, essentially, the more you keep that up to date and put information in the case management system, the more the AI can utilize that information to help you draft documents, summarize information, etc. Next thing I have to consider for advancing access to justice is identifying particular use cases. Some of the ways we think about it is, okay, what would we like that we know humans can't do? Okay, one way to think about it. And for us, we think about it in terms of the time tracking data. Like most lawyers, we track all of our time. So it's like, okay, how could we look at all the time that someone tracks in like large data sets and then make some summaries? And what we would like to see from our employees is that they are advancing to more complex tasks. And so can we use AI to look at time tracking over years to see if they're getting into more advanced tasks? Another one is your built-in tools, so like Copilot with Microsoft or Gemini with Google. As I mentioned, Clio Duo. A lot of your tools now are going to have those AI capabilities, and I encourage you to try those out now. And David, I encourage you to speak to some of this when you talk about the ethics piece, is that I would say to some degree, and David can fact check me, is that those built-in tools may already have some done some of your research, your terms and conditions, privacy, the things that if you were just to do it on your own, you're going to need to think through. Whereas I would hope, and hope is a key word here, and that is the truth, that they are being protective of your data, etc. So, but you'll want to look into that for yourself. So, for example, if you use the Clio Duo and Clio use the AI, you would think that they are protecting that data that's looking at. It's not being shared. It's not training their models, etc. So, I would say not a complete trust, some distrust, but hopefully those built-in tools that of AI that you'll have access to, they will already have done some of that safekeeping. As far as this is pro bono week, so I'm hoping over time that AI can assist pro bono attorneys. So let's say, for example, and this gets to one of the articles that I really like about AI, you have the collective intelligence of a legal aid organization around particular cases, let's say like eviction. And so oftentimes what we hear around pro bono is, well, an attorney maybe isn't comfortable in that practice area. We really need to train them on this area. Whereas now with AI, you could perhaps utilize a lot of information that a legal aid organization already has, and that could be a resource from an AI perspective for pro bono attorneys. So that's something I just encourage you to keep your eye on. And then one of the specific ways that we use AI is with appointment scheduling. We were talking about intake earlier. When a client applies for legal aid with a number of organizations that we've set up on the system, they schedule an appointment for the callback to do the interview. And then if they need to reschedule, they can just chat with AI assistant to reschedule. So for example, you'll get a text message saying your appointment is at 2:30 on Wednesday, and then you could reply, I need to reschedule, and then it would automatically say, okay, here's some other available times. So as far as the scheduling of meetings, we've taken that completely to AI, and it's worked very well for that. So it's nice to have some really winner use cases. Do you want me to keep going, Laura, or should
Yeah,
should
no, I mean,
I
we
pause here?
certainly, and feel free to chime in. I guess what I just take, because there's a lot to digest and everything that you've said. And so what I'm hearing you say is that there's a real potential here for AI because we're taking essentially software that can go into large data sets and pull out relevant information. There's a great opportunity for efficiencies here, and it's not only for minimizing administrative tasks by kind of creating a framework where you can easily and more quickly replicate administrative things like sending out engagement letters or kind of fielding the questions you need to field for client intake. There's also the ability to analyze and figure out, even from a practice management perspective, some of the concerns you may have. So if you're a legal services organization, you're trying to figure out like how many different matters do we have in each different area. It could really, because of the data sets that you may have in your system, be able to assess and calculate much more quickly than you could through other means. How many cases you're doing in a particular area, or how much time a lawyer may be spending on writing routine, complaints that maybe could be accelerated by generating a templatized complaint that could be modified or customized based on the particular issues that a client has at a given time. So there's a lot of potential here. One of the critical things I also heard you say, though, is the data set is also really important. One of the things that makes AI function is how much data it has available to it. If the data is not up to date, if it's not complete, if it's not correct and accurate, then the outputs or what the AI technology is going to produce for you is not going to be necessarily on point. So that's a really important kind of issue to think about. I'd also like to be kind of dovetailing off of that, would like to just talk round robin for a second before getting to the ethics issues about what some of those challenges are with AI technology. And I talked a little bit about the data sets and that the data input is potentially an issue. I'm wondering, if someone would like to just give a brief overview about hallucinations, and and kind of what that is and what happens there for everyone, just to be aware of where some of the pitfalls are on a technological front. Does anyone want to jump
Sure,
in?
I can go a little bit into that. So the hallucinations are, I think most people have probably heard about it's the most well-known of the downsides of current AI. And it's the result of the way the training is done, where you're supposed to get the closest you can to an answer, and you always are expected to return an answer. And so there is no training to say, if you don't know the answer, don't respond, right? And so therefore these models have actually in the training algorithms, they're incentivized as these neural networks are created to always provide an answer that sounds good. And because of that, it can create very, very elaborate and convincing falsehoods.
So, for example, we've seen situations where, most famously in New York, there were attorneys that were sanctioned because they cited cases that didn't exist in their brief after they used AI, right?
Yep, that's correct.
So that's a kind of concrete example. Deepfakes is kind of another space. I'm wondering if someone would like to take that one. Does anyone want to give an overview of?
I mean, those are so deep fakes and other convincing fabrications that are created on purpose, as opposed to hallucinations, which are the outcome of the training algorithms, are a byproduct of the way that the current training algorithms are designed. The deep fakes and convincing fabrications are something that's really going to have to be addressed by the rules of evidence. And I think that I have not heard a whole lot of thought going into that and what that's going to entail as more and more of these things start appearing before courts.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about this in my role on the task force, the ABA, and this is really challenging for folks, right? Because as many of you, I'm sure, have seen, a lot of the AI created images or documents, things that AI can generate now, it is really hard to discern whether that was created by a human or by a machine, and and that really causes a lot of challenges on the evidentiary front if you're looking to authenticate evidence. So that's one area where the deepfakes issue becomes really problematic. Not only do you have potential for there to be AI generated content that may not reflect reality, but you would have someone who's intentionally creating materials that are designed to really mislead people. So huge challenges there, and something that we as a legal community really need to stay focused on as an issue, and encourage our courts, to really grapple with this issue in a really constructive way. And transparency was another issue I know we were all talking about. And David, might as well just kick this to you as well, because this will lead into some of the ethical and challenging frameworks that we may need to be thinking about. I mean, there's this transparency issue, right? That when we're talking about how these technologies are developed, it's not always easy to know what went into developing the technology. There's kind of a black box problem, as it were. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of these large language models, these LLMs, which is the abbreviation that we'll be using regularly. So it's the LLM, large language model is the technical term for what we're now calling AI. There's lots of different types of AI, but throughout most of this and for the last 2 years, almost whenever someone's talking about AI, they're generally talking about large language models. And what you're doing is you're just feeding a lot of data into a neural network and training it. And often the data that is fed into these neural networks is proprietary, and we don't know what that data is that is being put in. And there are a lot of issues with bias. What sort of materials are being put in, maybe only one viewpoint or only one, and then there's also labeling issues. So the way that these LLMs work is they take a lot of labeled data that has been labeled by contractors. And so the contractors' biases as they're doing this labeling can affect the outcome of the model. And so now you're whenever you're relying on an LLM, you're essentially relying on the biases of those people in other countries being paid a cent per or less than a cent per label to label these vast quantities of data.
So there's really kind of a lot of different places where that bias can come in. It can come in at the programming level and how the software is developed. It can come in with the data input, and then also one of the other issues where I see potential uses with user inquiries, right? And how we engage as an end user with that technology and the kind of questions that we ask it.
Yeah, there is an enormous amount of variation in the quality of the responses that you can get depending on the questions that you ask, and therefore actually understanding that. And like there are now people whose entire job is just to design queries for LLMs. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Well, and for example, at the start of the presentation, I put into Google Chat, what is access to justice? Well, I actually had to prepare a couple of different prompts to get a reasonable answer out of Google. And if anyone hadn't noticed, it was an AI generated response that I had received when I typed that in. And I initially had started with access to justice, and I got one answer that was pretty perfunctory and not very interesting. And so I had to go a couple rounds of testing some questions to really get at the answer I was looking to find. So this is all really well highlights some of the technological issues. And then, of course, there are ethical considerations that we in the legal profession need to be thinking about. Probably at the forefront, I know from talking with a lot of people over the past year and a half on artificial intelligence and the use in the profession, confidentiality and client confidentiality. When we think about the risk to our ethical obligations, um, one of the big challenges is, when we're interacting with this, are we potentially risking our obligation to keep client information confidential?
We absolutely are. There's a lot of traditional terms of service language in that seemed perfectly fine 3 or 4 years ago for your data around using the data to improve services. So generally, the better terms of service would say that you retain copyright and the data will remain confidential, but that the data may be used. There will be a license to use the data to improve the service. And traditionally, what that meant was that if your document broke the document management system, then one of their programmers might look at the document and figure out how to fix it. But today, to improve these LLMs, they take the documents and they feed all the content of your document into the LLM, and that data gets encoded into these vectors and into the neural networks in such a way that with proper or improper querying, you can often extract from from those embeddings, you can extract some of that data back. And so what was traditionally considered a perfectly reasonable license now becomes very concerning from a confidentiality standpoint.
And then we also, I think, have challenges with, in addition to that, just we all have ethical obligations for technological competence. So keeping up to speed on AI technology, as Ray was pointing out, this is a fast evolving framework where we've got new and improved functionality that's happening in this space. And so staying on top of that and understanding the technology as we're integrating it into our practices is something that we not only have to do from a common sense perspective, but from an ethical perspective. And then finally, I think one of the other issues is you were talking about hallucination and deep fakes is the candor issue when we're talking about candor to the courts and candor to uh, uh, opposing counsel and to clients. We have to evaluate what tools we're using and ensuring and providing some kind of human oversight to ensure that what we're working with is really what we say it is. And I guess that kind of leads me to a question. David, I'll start with you to kick it off, but invite you, Ray and Joseph, to chime in. And what are some of the ways that we could actually mitigate some of these risks as we're contemplating adopting AI into our practice?
So I can talk a little bit about how we've been doing that in our particular situation at DC Refers. So at DC Refers, we have a referral service. We have, as I mentioned in the introductions, we have a stable of lawyers who are willing to represent people at below market rates if they're between 200 and 400% of the poverty line. And in our current system, a user goes to the website, they choose a category, just like Ray was talking about it's a very traditional way of doing it. They choose a category, and then we display a couple of attorneys that they can then pick from who practice in those areas. And as has already been mentioned, one of the problems there is that a lot of people don't know what category their legal issue falls into. And so what we decided to do was to investigate adding AI to that process. And what we ended up deciding on is a process where the user first makes informed, it gives their informed consent to use an artificial intelligence to have their data fed to the LLM, and then they describe their problem. It gets sent to an LLM. We're using OpenAI through Microsoft Azure services, and then it comes back and we extract the category from the LLM's response, and then display that category choice to the end user for them to confirm that that is the appropriate category, and then we go from there. And we built a number of protections into there. So first, in order to prevent, first of all, our goal here is to be more accurate in choosing categories than our users have been in choosing their own categories. So that's the first thing, is that we're not looking for 100% accuracy. If we were looking for 100% accuracy, an LLM would not be the way to go. I can't stress that enough. If you need 100% accuracy, do not use an LLM. A human might not have 100% accuracy either, but at least you know who the person is and you can improve them. But your LLM is almost certainly not going to be as accurate as a trained attorney. The second thing is that we didn't want it to be providing unsolicited legal advice, because we didn't want, I mean, that's just not our place, and it's not going to be correct legal advice in most cases anyway. But our queries were often returning, in addition to the category, it would say, and you should do this or that, right? And so by not we are not exposing the LLM's response directly to the end user. Instead, we're extracting a single piece of data, the category, from that LLM, and then displaying that category to the end user. So that is that's protecting us from a lot of that hallucination and the tendency to ramble on about things that it really shouldn't be rambling on about. On the privacy side of things, I'll be honest, we're not really excited that we're using OpenAI. There's a lot of charlatans out there. There's a lot of companies that we frankly don't trust that are providing services. We looked at a number of others, and Azure's going with OpenAI through Azure seemed to give the best license terms for our use case. I'm not going to recommend them for anybody else, but just that was what we found. So that's our belt. And then our suspenders is that we actually, so even Microsoft, going through Microsoft Server, they still say that they reserve the right to look at the queries and the responses to look for abuse. So they don't want people using it for like really, really horrible stuff, right? And so they always reserve that right. And so before sending it to the LLM, we have a small 1.5 gigabyte model. So most of these models are like gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes, right? And they take huge amounts of memory, 100 gigabytes of memory. We have one that takes up just 1.5 gigabytes, which means we can run it on a local server. And the model was trained for exactly one thing. It's not a general language model. It is just designed to find personally identifiable information. And it's pretty decent at that. I'm not going to say it's great, but it's better than nothing. It's not nearly as good as a human, but we run on our local server, we run the user's input through this PII anonymizer, and it replaces it with placeholders that the LLM will still understand as names or addresses or whatever. And then after it's been anonymized by our little model, then we send it to OpenAI through Azure. And so that's sort of our belt and suspenders. We're using a technological approach, and we were looking at licenses to try and get a license approach that would also protect us. You can say with pretty high confidence that anytime you're using a free service, you are they are going to be using your data.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you really talk about, David, is the reality that if you're at all contemplating using AI, it's really important to understand what the source of the information is and to understand what the data sets are that a particular vendor or company is using. Um, the other thing I'm hearing in what you're saying is kind of some of the core principles of what those looking at AI and how AI can be used responsibly. And there's a concept called responsible AI. Is that human oversight principle is really one of the core aspects of working and using AI. And so that's definitely one of the core principles and issues that can be used to mitigate any potential downsides and risks that could be produced by using AI technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are, fortunately for us in the legal profession, there have been some really great deep thinkers in the science and technology space that have really kind of thought through some of the ethical principles, not the legal ethical alone, but globally the ethical concepts involved in adopting this technology. The National Institute for Standards and Technology uh, uh, standards at NIST has also produced quite a bit of information about the frameworks that we ought to contemplate using when we're looking at responsible AI. There have also been a number of executive orders that have been put out by the White House. I just saw something recently last month where they're also looking at developing ways to build infrastructure for the presumed adoption and greater widespread use of AI technology across the country. And so understanding one of the things you mentioned were servers and ensuring we had server capacity, looking at those kinds of issues. But I would also encourage those of you who are interested in getting kind of a backbone understanding of what the core principles are, what people have been thinking about, to take a look. NIST is one entity that has done a lot of work in this area. There's also a National Advisory Council on Artificial Intelligence that was set up by the White House. There are a number of resources and articles and reports that they have done. And then, of course, from a policy perspective, looking at some of the executive orders and some of the frameworks that are being developed in the conversations and coming. There's some initial reports, and there's been look at potential statutory frameworks in Congress. There've been a lot of hearings and such on the Hill. So that hopefully gives you all a sense of some of the issues surrounding this. And if you're interested in understanding some of the context behind it, some of those resources are available for you in the link. Is there anything else, Ray or Joseph, you'd like to add to this
Yeah,
discussion
just
on this issue?
a few things to think about today. So also, when I was preparing, I was like, all right, what can I give people that something they can do today? One thing to look out for is in your system settings, is there are going to be increasingly toggles that's like use AI or don't. So for example, we use Airtable a lot, and so you can choose whether to allow people to use AI within their basis or not. So you're going to be seeing those in all the systems that you use. So something to keep an eye out on and kind of prepare, what you're thinking about in advance of when that day comes, and it could be today. There are systems I'm sure using right now that have that ability to switch it on or off, is how you want to utilize that, and then also for your team.
Great, thanks, Ray. Any additional thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess just building on what David and Joseph have already mentioned. So, uh, our approach for our lawyer referral service in terms of risk mitigation is to layer as many risk mitigation strategies as we can, and also
Great point.
just to avoid risk wherever we can. So inherent in our system is that the client contacts the lawyer, right? So the lawyer's information is public, the client's presumably is not. So we don't even want the client's information. We don't want your PII. We say that in our terms and conditions. We remind people as they're going and they're filling out their legal issue, do not enter PII. But then also, as David mentioned too, some sort of mechanism for when the client does go in and enter their legal issues, some sort of mechanism to be able to dump that, whether that's entered as like a temporary file on a computer and then it's deleted thereafter. That's pretty important as well. But ultimately, for us again, having a small but mighty internal team, and then also leaning on our vendor to ensure that we're remaining in compliance of our own terms and conditions is very important.
Those are all great points. And we're going to do some final thoughts here. But as we're wrapping up the formal part of the presentation, if anyone has questions, I encourage you to go ahead and post those in the chat. I think what I have heard today is I've heard three different perspectives that really present a very thoughtful and thorough approach to artificial intelligence and how we need to be thinking about this in a really responsible way. So I just want to highlight for those of you who are participating in today's call and joining us that there are a number of people that are really thinking through the challenges that the technology presents to really leverage that for the benefit of creating greater opportunity and efficiency across the board. And I think we have three wonderful examples of that today. So I want to thank all three of you for being here and participating in today's conversation. I guess, as we're wrapping up, do any of you have some final parting thoughts or key takeaways that you'd like to share with our attendees today?
I'll I'll go first, then I'll as there's a few things on ethics, and then
Yes.
I'll wrap around at the end on some non-ethics items. But a few things that come to mind that I don't think we've mentioned yet on ethics is to a degree hiring and human resource allocation. So one of the challenges we see in working in access to justice and AI is that oftentimes the people working on these projects, they are doing it as like a partial duty, like a little bit here and there. And I would say, given the complexities and ethics and privacy issues with AI, it's going to be really tough to do it well when it's someone's just like extra duty of AI. So I encourage all of your organizations to consider how you're going to essentially assign someone to, like, AI is their job or a very significant part of their job, because it's I would say from what I mentioned, also it's so rapidly changing that just someone who does it here and there, there's a lot of risk in not having someone whose actual job is that. And then I forgot my second one, so I'll pass it back to you, Laura.
When it comes to mind, just shout out. Ray, do you have any parting key
I,
takeaways?
I just one takeaway. So this is our CIO's brainchild that we're gonna implement here in the next couple months. We're having an AI Olympics at the DC bar. So this is going to encourage everyone, regardless of sort of where they are in the organization, to think about how we could potentially utilize AI to deliver more value. So I think it'll be fascinating to see what folks come up with. It'll give us a lot of ideas to sort of cut our teeth on, and look forward to seeing who wins.
I love that idea. What a great way to really engage your team and really think through the challenges that everyone's looking to navigate. That's a brilliant idea. David, any parting thoughts from you? I think, yeah, you're on mute, I believe. Yep.
Sorry about that. I just want to underscore how rapidly everything is changing. In my day job, we were looking at an AI project where we were going to have to like collaborate with a university, some researchers, and it was going to be like $80,000 plus a bunch more for training. And that was just out of our budget. About 6 months ago, 4 months ago, we were able to do the entire project for under $2,000 with an intern. So that's what 1 year did.
Wow.
And that's just it's going to be like that for a while more before things go back to linear growth. I also would like to this is something, one of my own pet projects, but I would encourage you when you're talking with your vendors, try and get indemnification. Talk is cheap. These legal providers who are providing LLMs should be confident enough in their technology that they would actually indemnify you for a lot of these things that you could get sued for various breaches. I haven't seen any that are actually willing to do that, but if enough people start talking about it, I think especially the legal providers, they need to be putting their money where their mouth is. That's just
That's a
that's the only my own little plug here. If enough people start demanding it, they will figure out a way to do it, and they'll start taking things a lot seriously than just their pieces of paper that don't cost them anything.
No, that's an excellent point, and definitely, I live by the adage, if you don't ask, you don't get. So that's really important. I also just wanted to mention, David, that you've done some really important work for DC Refers in putting together this framework and this technology to help really bolster the legal referral service. And we also did that with a tremendous financial support from the American Bar Endowment,
Yes.
which extended us a grant to be able to do that. So, I encourage those of you who are with nonprofit organizations and legal services providers to think out of the box when it comes to how to implement or adopt these technologies for your work. I know that certainly when you hear the layers of sophistication that go into developing large language models and the technology, you could say, well, gosh, we can't, the resources just aren't there to do this. But I think with some creativity, you can do that, and there may even be opportunities to kind of pull resources together. And really look for affordable solutions that meet the needs of what is required to ensure that there's ethical compliance with the tools that you're using. I think imparting what some of the things we just as a refresher, what we need to know as lawyers is the key of technological competency, and really at least understanding the basic functionality of how AI works. Certainly thinking about client confidentiality and understanding a little bit about how the data sets get put together in the resources that you're using, but also be thinking thoughtfully about the prompts that you're looking to use to look for information when you're using AI, and then of course making sure you're aware of what kind of responsibilities you might have to the courts, and the duty to disclose. I have seen across the country that there are a number of courts that have ordered uh, disclosure when AI is being used, no matter how big or how small. And of course, that's presenting all kinds of challenges, because if you're using a tool like LexisNexis or Westlaw, or some of these other research tools, some of them are certainly building in AI technologies into their functionality. And so you have to kind of think, well, am I required to disclose that I used Lexis to do the research on this case, or kind of what are the layers? So it's important to be thinking about that. I will just say, is my parting thought, one of the core areas that the AI task force of the American Bar Association looked at was the access to justice issue. And in our annual report, which is available in the link in the chat, there was a presentation of a path forward and the kind of the key areas where we thought it was really important to create opportunity for the access to justice community. And that includes educating members about the use of AI tools. And this is certainly one of the things that we've accomplished here today, publicizing actual use cases and demonstrating for people how AI can be used. Developing quality standards. So again, we were having this conversation about what kind of guardrails do we really need to be thinking about putting in place when we're using the tools or we're developing tools for our own use. And then finally, making affordable tools accessible to the legal services community, which really is a challenging proposition, because certainly those who can afford and can invest huge sums into developing AI technology will have that available to their disposal. But there's a role and a place here for those of us in the community to really advocate to ensure that those tools are also made available for the good of the public, as we think about all of these issues in Pro Bono Week. So on that note, I will just open it up for questions. I see that we have a
Laura, I'd
few.
like to, is it
Yeah,
okay if
go
I
ahead,
jump in here
please.
with
Yeah,
a few of those things that came to mind?
yeah, yes,
Yeah, so
please.
a few things to wrap up on the ethics was your jurisdiction. So let's say Washington, D.C., they very well may be thinking about laws related to AI or the bar. So I encourage you to participate and have a voice. I think people interested in access to justice need to have a voice about what regulations may be put in place in terms of AI. Another ethics issue that's been coming to mind is around digital accessibility. So if you're
Mm,
familiar with, and then has been more from the White House about accessibility in the government, is okay, this AI tool, is it digitally accessible? Is it accessible to someone who's using a screen reader, etc. And then some final thoughts around like next steps. First one that comes to mind is prepare your data foundations. So as we talked about, like with the Clio example, you have to have the data in the system for you to use AI on it. So maybe you're not ready to go full AI yet. Okay, we'll start thinking about making sure your data is organized so you can use AI for it. And then you need to be using a system that has APIs. So these systems are going to go and connect to some type of large language model through an API. Whereas let's say you're using like an Excel spreadsheet, I mean, maybe you could figure out a way to connect that, but if it's online, but if your system is not doesn't have a way to connect to APIs, that's going to be a lot more challenging. Third one is I really encourage you to keep notes. So let's say from our call today, keep a journal. Here's my AI journal. Here's my thoughts on AI. We encourage our team to do that as well. Just like, all right, keep your thoughts, because at some point that technology is going to be more readily available and you'll want to reference those, like, all right, like I've been thinking about this for a while, keeping my journal of thoughts on AI, and now let me try this thing. Looking for potential use cases, so kind of with those notes. And then the final one, and kind of to what Laura said, is grants. Okay, so a lot of organizations, especially your legal service organizations that get grants, there are going to be funders that want to fund AI projects. So utilizing your journal of your thoughts, and you prepared your data foundations, like, all right, I've got a situation, I've got a use case, I've been doing some training. Another one that comes to mind is regular training, like this session today. All right, I've got, my preparation is going to meet opportunity, and I'm going to try to get a grant so we can invest more into AI. And with that, I'll pass it back to Laura for
and
Q&A.
that was great. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Are there any questions that we have? I did see one. Um, uh, so one of the questions that we've got in the chat is that, of course, AI can help us do these tasks more quickly, right? But but every AI work must be verified and validated. Is that right? Does someone want to take that and speak to that?
That's been
Go
my
ahead, Ray. Yeah,
experience.
go ahead. David.
I think that that's one of the problems with AI in its current state, is that, as Joseph said, you really do need someone dedicated to AI. Well, that's one FTE. That's a lot for most small nonprofits, and that's why I was suggesting suggesting that you can shift some of that to other people with indemnification, right? You can shift a lot of that due diligence to your vendors with good indemnification, which you as a lawyer can properly draft. But so that's one cost center, and then you need to be doing a lot of stuff for AI to pay off, right? You have to be doing a lot. You either have to be using very concrete patterns that go well beyond the legal realm that Microsoft has already sort of done the QA for, like doing your calendaring, right? That's something that every organization does. You can rely on Microsoft's QA to validate that use case, and after you've tried it a little bit, you can go to the races on that. But then when you're talking about things that are very particular to your practice, or even things that are particular to the law, like the amount of resources that Microsoft's able to put into the calendaring is vastly larger than what the practice management software systems are able to put into their services. And so you're going to need to do a lot more validation of those things. So it really is a law of large numbers here. The more generic the thing is that you're doing, the more effectively you're going to be able to leverage AI initially.
Oh, those are
Otherwise,
great
it will be
pointers.
extremely expensive.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, so we also have another question, and this is I would say adjacent to using AI tools in practice, but I think is an important question. We've got someone who's attending that's pointed out that Epic has published a report that has showcased all the different DC government agencies that are already using algorithms, and looking at trying to get to the bottom of what information sources they're using to fuel the algorithms. How do any of you have any suggestions or thoughts how you get around the access issue to ensure the data is being used
I
for
mean,
how these decisions are being made with the algorithms?
yeah, this was something that I didn't even want to delve into in this one because I feel
It's
like
huge.
it requires a whole conference,
Yes.
and it's really about the larger issue of abdication, where for the last 15 years, Google really perfected this idea of using the algorithm as an abdication of responsibility. Um, AI is going to take that and multiply the problem enormously. At least with the algorithm, it was always kind of a fanciful fabrication that it wasn't a human behind it making tweaks here and there. But with the AI, there is such a remove between the training processes and the queries that there is a true abdication of responsibility. Um, and this is something that is really already impacting at all levels. And I've already experienced it with AI note-taking services where I would take notes and then someone would send me the AI notes, and the AI notes were in better organization than mine. And then I would read through them and I'm like, yeah, that did a pretty good job. And then I would look at my notes and realize that it was emphasizing entirely different things. And in the process of reading those notes, it had completely transformed the conversation by reprioritizing the things that the AI had thought was important, until I looked at my notes again and realized, actually, this was the really important thing that the AI had sort of glossed over, right? And that's a minor thing that's an issue. And like you have that issue if you have human assistants who take notes for you, but there's a much tighter feedback loop there where you can come to trust your assistant and you can actually provide feedback, whereas most of these AI note-taking systems don't allow you to provide that feedback to the AI that, oh yeah, this is actually the thing that was important. Pay attention to that next time.
Yeah, it's like a giant game of telephone, but it's processing through like 100,000 people in like a nanosecond. It goes really fast. And then you get this result that doesn't look anything like or have the intent behind it that you originally started out with. So and that gets to some of the concerns, like the hallucinations and deep fake concerns we were talking about earlier in a different way. I would just add that I have. I definitely have seen, just because of the area that I practice in, which tends to be media and intellectual property. I mean, there are obviously some high profile copyright cases that are pending in courts that are really targeting how we're getting at the information base. And I am aware that there are other cases around these data sets that are out there. I just am not recalling any names or specifics on them off the top of my head. But I do know that there are groups that are starting to tap the tires on this and really try to get into the meat of how some of these algorithms are being developed and what data sets they're using. So I think we will undoubtedly see a lot of discussion and litigation around these issues in the near future. Um, I also have a question. I think it's directed to you specifically, David. If you could share what the specific language is that asks for users' informed consent to use AI on the DC Refer site and how you thought through that issue.
Sure. So we're still iterating on that consent language, but I'd be happy to show you where we are at the moment. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right. Can you all see the find an affordable lawyer?
Yep.
All right. So yeah, we go into find a lawyer, and of course, zoom is right where I don't want it. Then we'll continue Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We'll skip whether we qualify for reduced fees. And this is our language right now. Do you want AI to help you choose a legal category? The description of your legal issue will be sent to OpenAI servers for analysis. We will do our best to automatically remove any personally identifiable information prior to submission to OpenAI. If you do not wish to use AI, simply click Continue without AI button to proceed. And so you can clearly click to skip it. And then here you have, you can enter your legal issue. I can take a sample. This is a live demo, so I hope it will actually work. Here's a query. So this is asking about consumer credit card debt, and then it takes a little bit. Funny enough, the little PII anonymizing language model takes longer than the OpenAI model because we're on a little underpowered private virtual machine. But then you can see here that our AI recommends debt collection and consumer protection and debt law. It's selected, and you can either accept and continue, or you can switch to a different category. And that's it. We tried to keep it as basic and boring as possible, and as not whiz-bang as possible.
Yeah, no, that's great. But what I think interesting, this goes to Ray's point when he's talking about the legal referral platform for the DC bar as well. You know, the thought that went into really making this a client-driven selection process, right?
Mm.
So hopefully that answers your question. I see that there's also a question here that many legal service providers will use communications and storytelling about the clients or communities they serve for outreach and fundraising. So I guess the question comes up too about how that could be used for using tools to help streamline or design needs. What are some ethical considerations that we might want to keep in mind in that framework? Is there any information or content you'd recommend that not be shared with AI platforms like ChatGPT?
Just a few thoughts on this is don't put any personally identifiable information or any like the real name of the person. In order for it to create a story in a sense, you may use a fictitious name just so that the name flows through if you want to use a fictitious name. But that's the main thing is don't put the actual person's name in there or something that would identify them like address, etc.
And that can be difficult. There's some security researchers who have been doing work with de-anonymization of of LLM queries. And what they found is that because a lot of these LLMs are taking in vast quantities of public records, that even removing someone's name, if there's a public record that identifies that story closely enough, you could easily, the LLM could potentially, and security researchers have been able to extract names from supposedly anonymized data because there were sufficient similarities to the public records. So it's hard. You're talking to an entity that has been trained on amounts of information that it's hard to fathom, I guess, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, and some of the comments that have been added to the chat as we've been talking also talks about some of the discriminatory implications of this. And, you know, we certainly touched on this a bit. I know one story that comes to mind to me is there was in Pennsylvania, there was a social services organization that was using AI to basically kind of assess how parents were doing with children. And then what was happening with that is that it was skewing and finding more frequently than not that neurodivergent parents were more frequently than coming up under parent neglect uh, 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 challenges and losing parental rights because the way the questions were being framed and asked, and then of course their answers, because they were answering from a perspective of being neurodivergent and maybe not kind of reading into the context of the questions that were being presented. So there were lots of frameworks, and I've heard lots of conversations about these issues. And I think, you know, I think those of you that are thinking about that, it's important to keep thinking about those issues, because that bias implication, no matter what framework you're looking at it from, it is something that is you know, a shortcoming of the technology, and that's because of the, you know, frankly, the frameworks of the folks that are programming and the data sets that are being used, and then the functionality of the software itself, as David was pointing out. So,
And I would mention that the pressure of the speed of the developers. Like I would say, like, these companies, they're expected to compete with these very large companies and produce things. And I don't think it's necessarily a safety first environment that they can take years to figure this stuff out. I get a sense that they have a lot of pressure to produce and get things out there.
there's a lot of demand for technology now, and a lot of people are anxious to access and implement AI technology because it's the thing. It's what everyone's doing, right? And so you feel like you're falling behind in the commercial setting, you're falling behind your competitors if you haven't integrated it, and that may be coming at the expense of the safety frameworks that we really should be putting these technologies through as we're adopting them and developing them. Absolutely. Are there any other questions that anyone has for us? Kathy, I'm wondering, have you seen any other questions?
No new questions. There was a great question about this overall panel presentation, which is just because the presentation is being recorded, if that recording will be shared back with today's participants. And yes, Washington Council of Lawyers will share a recording in their follow-up email, along with all of the links that have been shared in the chat today.
Yeah, so for anyone who was not able to join us live, but will be able to see the recording, the chat is not typically shared, so we will have an information sheet, as Kathy mentioned, that will provide some links to some of the resources that we've shared during the conversation today. Are there any other? I just want to make sure if there's anyone that didn't feel comfortable in the chat and would like to put their hand up, I want to give you an opportunity to ask live if you would prefer to do it that way. And I'm leaving some time for that. Ray, I would just ask, like, with the DC bar, so it sounds like the tool that the DC bar referral service is using is imminent. It's going to go live in the next month or so. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we've got over 800 attorneys who have signed up, and now it's just a mad dash to get enough, and I'm not going to share exactly what that number is, enough to completely finish their profiles, so that when the public comes in, we have, a critical mass of attorneys that the system can filter through and then provide results for. But we estimate that we're very close, probably a few weeks from now. And when we do launch, it will be through social media and our Facebook page and on the bar page and everything else. So stay tuned.
And David, DC refers functionality in helping visitors to the site streamline and get a better sense of what kind of lawyer they might need. Can you tell us a little bit about the timing of that and how that seems to be going so far?
Yeah, so our timeline is probably pretty similar. We're looking to launch in the next week to 2 weeks.
Great.
We're just doing our final tests of the queries to get and tweaks to the language, to the opt out or language.
And I would just say, I mean, what do you, does anyone have any thoughts here about what tools it might be we're most likely to see us using AI for in the near future? I mean, we're hearing a lot about today. With those of us here in this presentation, we've been looking at client intake and helping clients kind of navigate the legal system and get an entry point so they understand that, one, they have a legal issue, and two, who they could reach out to who might have expertise and to be able to assist them. Joseph, I heard you earlier mentioning that there are opportunities to really use this for an efficiency perspective. For those in the legal services community, are there particular frameworks or tools that you think are available now or in the near future that ought to be of interest to people attending today's call?
Yeah, I think it's all your systems to a degree that you're probably already using: your case management system, your document management system, your legal research system. They're all going to be utilizing AI. And so you want to prepare, and as I discussed, it may come at a cost. So it's like, all right, are you gonna pay the extra however much per month to have it, or not? So you'll want to already be thinking about these things in advance.
And so it may also warrant, in terms of conversations in the community with organizations like the District of Columbia Bar, that has a law practice management outfit that is designed to help guide attorneys. Those kind of conversations, or conversations within the legal services community as well, potentially framing like what are our best practices around this. Like if we're looking at adopting AI, what kind of questions should we be asking? What kind of things we should be doing? And that kind of coming out of the silos on this a bit more, so that there's broader awareness and knowledge to really help bolster this for
Yeah,
improving more access to justice situation. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
know that, I think that's a great point, because let's say in DC there's over 50 organizations that provide nonprofit legal services. Well, if every single organization has to work on their own, like thinking on AI and policy, like that is going to take a lot of time and effort. I think that the community be well served to have some committees or some groups that work together on these things with experts to develop maybe some template policies that then those organizations can adapt. So
Yeah, so we're in the process right now of developing our next 5-year strategic plan at the DC Bar, and I was actually just emailing with the director of professional services over at ABA that's helping us out. So I'll make sure that we make a note of this as we go through our planning process.
That's fantastic. Well, on that note, I don't see any more questions. Do we have any more questions, Kathy, that you see that I may have missed?
No, no new questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will personally put my email in the chat, so that if anyone has any follow-up questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and any of the other panelists. If you are willing to field questions, please by all means go ahead and do the same. And we are going to wrap up today's presentation. I do want to thank everyone here for joining us and partaking in this conversation. This is a big space. And in my view, this is generationally the biggest transformation that we've seen in the legal profession. And it has great potential. And so what I'm hoping is that if we can accurately and adequately really identify and navigate the risks that the technology presents, we could really make some terrific inroads on providing greater access to justice. So on that note, thank you everyone, and please do reach out to us if you have any questions.